Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Getting Started, Professional Pathways in Public Service. My name is Kyleigh Purnell, and I'm of the college class of 1991, and I will serve as our moderator today. We are joined by several amazing alumni who will share their professional journeys in public service and provide advice on how to enter the sector. This panel is designed for all years of students and alumni who are interested in pursuing a career in public service, so we are delighted that so many of you decided to join our conversation today. Before we delve into our dialogue, I want to briefly introduce each of our panelists. We will go in the order of the program today. So I'm joined today by Giacomo Bagarella, class of 2013, who is the policy advisor to the Chief Digital Officer of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Office of Technology Services and Security. His side interests are foreign and economic policy, and he has lived and worked in the United States, Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Next to him is Betsy Biemann. Betsy is CEO of CEI, a mission-driven investor working to make Maine's economy work better for everyone. Her prior experience is varied, but it includes director of the Harvard Study of Maine's food economy, a program officer at the Rockefeller Foundation, as well as a Rotary Fellow in Kenya. And then next to her is Kyleigh Russ, class of 14, the co-founder and chief operating officer of Govern for America, a nonprofit that is building the next generation of public sector leaders across the nation. So please join me in welcoming our panelists today. The way that we will conduct the session is that I will pose 5 questions to our panelists to start, to get the conversation going, and then there'll be plenty of time at the end for Q&A with each of our panelists. Okay, so let's get started with our first question. What do you think the biggest misconception about public sector careers is?
Well, thank you, Kathy, and thank you all for being here at this panel today. I will try to keep my answers relatively short, and if you have any follow-up questions, you can ask them in the Q&A section. So I'll focus on the 3 things that to me stand out as some of the biggest myths about public sector careers. First, that people who work in the public sector, your average civil servant is either lazy or uninterested or unintelligent. Just to be blunt. I've worked at the local, state, and national level in New York City, here in Massachusetts, and in the UK. And I can't count how many people I've met who are truly impressive civil servants who are really driven and committed to what they do, and from whom I have learned many, many things. And so while, like in every organization, you'll find people who are a bit jaded or there for the 9 to 5, I really don't think that you can make a generalization that the people you'll work with are not committed to the goal of public service. Second, there might be a myth that you don't learn new things, or it's not an environment where you can grow and develop as a professional. Again, in my experience, I've been fortunate to be in environments where I received a lot of responsibility, where I was tasked with really important projects. Into my first month of the job that I have right now, my boss came up to me and said, Giacomo, this is February, we're having an intern program this summer. I want you to hire 30 interns. And I had never hired a single intern before or managed a single intern before. And so I had to ramp this up in 3 months, and I learned a lot. We had a successful internship program, did it again the following year, and I made a lot of connections and was able to bring in a lot of talent into my office through this program as well. Third, there's the notion that pay is bad in the public sector, and I think pay is definitely not competitive with finance or tech or consulting if you're thinking about those industries. But the pay is not bad. It's definitely compensation that is, very good in this day and age, especially as you move into more senior or leadership positions. And it's not something where you have to tighten your belt or deprive yourself of, comforts or even like being able to travel or do things that you enjoy. And it just might mean that you have to do a little bit more of financial planning, being a little bit more aware of what you're spending. But I think that it's completely commensurate with good quality of life and shouldn't be something as an obstacle of you starting a public sector career.
So Betsy or Kyleigh, any thoughts?
Sure. I guess I had two. First of all, I just think, and I have perhaps a slightly broader definition of either public service or public interest careers, perhaps, than the two of you do. But I'm not sure people are always aware of the diversity of public interest career options that there are out there. I'm a little older than the two folks to my right and left, but I've worked in philanthropy in the nonprofit sector. I've worked for government, but ran a public-private partnership for the state of Maine. I'm a mission-driven investor. I've been a consultant for a little while, which is like being an entrepreneur. You've got your own business. And I was the director of a research project at Harvard. So, and that's just me. There are lots of other folks who have done many other things. So a lot of diversity and opportunity. And I've done, that work has been for about a third of my career international, a third of my career national, and now the most recent third of my career working across the state of Maine and focused on rural America. So the second point is, I think there's an impression that it's hard to make a difference. It's hard, you're in these institutions that are a little fossilized, and how can you really make a difference? And I would say, I can see that we're making a difference every single day. And it's particularly excited because we're often making a difference by helping other people make a difference. So instead of just adding impact, you're multiplying impact and you're having relationships with these folks. So I'd say both of those are misconceptions. The last thing I would say on the pay issue is I've always said that folks working in sort of these kinds of careers, we have psychic stock options. We get to feel really excited and good about what we do every single day.
Yeah, and the two things that I would add is I think that there is a conception that you can't build a career from the bottom to the top in public sector, but instead that you should start in the private sector. Especially this is something we hear in government. Start in the private sector, build your careers, like build your portfolio, and then move over. And I from my experience, that hasn't been true. There are young people who are making incredible difference at every level of government, but also in the nonprofit space, who are really smart and excited and passionate and willing to put in a lot of time, keep raising their hands, and that's how you build your career, and that's how you make a difference right away, and you really don't have to start in the private sector and transition over. And then the last piece to that is there are positions that are really exciting and that are really prestigious in the private sector, like consulting or some type of analyst. But if you actually look at the job descriptions that fall under those titles, and then you compare them to jobs in the public sector, you can often do a lot more in the public sector, build your skills much faster, and be doing work that ultimately is making an impact beyond just your paycheck.
Yeah, no, Kyleigh, that's a wonderful segue to our next question, which is, what skills do you feel you have gained or developed through your work in public service? So anyone, who wants to start?
Yeah, I can kick this one off. For me, the biggest thing has been stakeholder management and coalition building. In the public sector, we do often have less resources than you may have in the private sector, and so it's really important to get input up front and learn how to use the limited resources that you have with a team of people who have input and buy-in, and really building that coalition from the bottom up.
I'd add a number that are somewhat obvious given what I just listed I've done, but public policy analysis and advocacy, obviously critical to this field and to all of us. Nonprofit management, which can be quite similar to managing a for-profit, but has some special challenges that are quite different than in the private sector. Strategic communications. I think we just saw the previous session was an extraordinary example of that. I only aspire to, 40 years from now, be able to be such an effective communicator. Partnership building, bridging sectors, being able to work effectively with folks from the for-profit, nonprofit, government sectors, and bringing them together behind a common goal, and sort of leveraging what makes them special to that particular project. Mission-driven investment. How do you leverage those kinds of dollars? How do you try to move traditional capital into a mission-driven direction? I could go on, but those are some.
Yeah. I would start from Excel, which is the workhorse of any organization, which may sound dreary, but it's true. But something that relates to both what Kyleigh and Betsy mentioned is managing change and customer relations. So even though you might work in government or a nonprofit organization, you have a customer, whether those are constituents or taxpayers, or civil servants in some other agency that you provide services to. You have somebody who is dependent on what you provide and on whose goodwill your success depends. So learning how to serve those people and figuring out what they need and how to deliver to them in the best possible way is something that I got to learn in my role working with many state agencies across Massachusetts. And it's something that I will really take away with me for the rest of my career in terms of something that can allow me to be successful both in the public sector, private sector, or wherever else I may choose to work.
Okay, wonderful. And so next, reflecting on your career or pathway can be either, what do you love most about your career or pathway, and what do you consider the biggest challenge?
So for me, one of the biggest challenges is getting people to remember that I work for the governor, not for the mayor. I think a lot of people really get confused between the two, even lots of people who go to public policy school and have known me for quite some time. Two other challenges that I would mention are, first, there's the one thing that might be missing in the public sector is a lack of a structure to career advancement. So in the private sector, you might start off as an analyst, become a senior analyst, associate, and so on, and it's pretty linear, and there's good systems in place to help you move along. It doesn't exist as much in the public sector, in my experience. And there's always the uncertainty that political shifts or changes in administration may cause. I was in the change between the Bloomberg and de Blasio administration when I was working in New York City government, and it was night and day what happened when the administrations changed. But what I really like and what keeps me enjoying and excited about the work that I do are the colleagues that I have. I really do enjoy going to work and working alongside them, as well as maybe getting a drink or having them over for dinner after work. The opportunities and responsibilities that I'm given, as Kyleigh mentioned, is really a place where you, because your organization might be small or strapped for resources, you really get a lot of opportunities to pick something up and lead it across the finish line. And finally, even though it might sound a little bit sappy, but really serving the constituents and the public at large is the biggest energizer and the biggest reason why I am committed to this area.
So I'll start with what I love, and I guess a really important thing, especially right now in our history, is that I think many of us, probably in this room and elsewhere, find it a very difficult period of our history to be in and feel a sense of sometimes despair and anger and frustration with what's going on in our country and our world, whether it's increasing income inequality, the political divisions in our society, and living in Maine, the fact that rural America has really been left behind in many ways from the and has particular needs that haven't really been reflected that well in our public policy and investment. So the fact that there's something I can do where I feel like I'm making a difference, I think if I wasn't making a difference, it would be extremely depressing. So the fact that I'll say just couple of words about my organization. And I've brought a little bit of information if anyone's interested, but I run an organization that's an impact investor, community development financial institution. So sort of we basically are trying to grow good quality jobs, green enterprises, and more broadly shared prosperity across Maine, but through several financing subsidiaries across rural New England and the country. And so we make about 85 micro and small loans a year to small businesses across Maine. And, you know, seeing those entrepreneurs starting businesses and helping them get the capital they need when banks or venture capitalists have not invested in those businesses, creating jobs for veterans, trying to diversify our marine economy, building extraordinary companies in small towns and regions that our current culture of entrepreneurship and investment, when we're always talking about the Bay Area and Boston and Cambridge, folks don't always recognize that there are great entrepreneurs all over this country. So knowing that and meeting these folks and knowing that we're helping them to be successful and talking with immigrants and refugees who've come to Maine, who are, trying to get a foothold in a new community and a new economy, and helping connect them with jobs or microloans. It's very personally satisfying, and it sort of makes the challenges like raising the money and doing all the work and never having enough time. All of those challenges pale a bit when you're in a role where you've that's exciting and personally fulfilling. Just also echoing, just working with a team of people who are extraordinary as we do that every day and who are committed, hardworking, innovative folks is wonderful. And also being part of an ecosystem of support and action in our state where it's not only the roles, the team inside of our organization, but the partnerships we have with like-minded organizations is very satisfying.
Yeah, so I'll say that I feel lucky that I'm a founder of an organization, so I think that inherently brings a lot of interesting work, and I'm making decisions and like figuring out the way that things work as I go, and we can be really nimble. But to make the response to this question a little bit more broadly applicable, I really appreciate my, albeit short, journey so far. So I taught for a couple years out of after I graduated, which if it's something you're considering, I highly recommend. Teaching has so many broadly applicable skills that you build, and I don't think that I would be where I am if I hadn't taught. What I'm doing now at a systems change level is different than teaching, and I think it's really important to figure out what band of impact you're interested in making your impact. So. Is it direct service? And if you're not sure, you should try direct service first. And if after direct service you decide that it is more of a system change, higher level change that you're interested in making, then it's easier to move that way than it is to move backwards, I think. And so I would say that's something that I've loved about my career is I've had the chance to try different levels of impact, and I think I found a place that I'm happy, but I may end up going to a different level at some point too.
Okay. Now this next question is going to ask you to think back to that first moment when you decided to work in the public sector. Often students have a clear idea of where they want to go professionally, but less clarity on how to get there. How did you take that first step to actualize public service work outside of Harvard?
Sure. So my first step was going to the career service office, like that. I mean, kind of your classic. They have really great people there to work with that specifically are trying to match people with good nonprofits and positions in the public sector, and that is increasingly true. I think it's more now. It's true now more so than it even was when I was here. But I would say that it was, again, back to what I last said, I was trying to figure out where can I make direct service impact right now, so with the idea that later on I'm going to want to make impact at a different level. of the government policy stratosphere. So I think it's really figuring out what's your policy area or what's your interest area, and then figuring out where can you insert yourself and make a difference right away. So again, that's why I keep coming back to the direct service. You can make a difference right away at the direct service. You can build your foundation, and then if you want to kind of move up, then it's a lot easier to do that after you've built some requisite skills. And that's how I thought about my time directly after Harvard, even though a lot of times people would be like, really, you're a teacher? And you went to Harvard? And I don't think that that's something that would be shocking to anybody here, but it felt like part of my path, but also felt like something that I needed to do in order to make higher level change.
I was far less strategic. When I came to Harvard, I thought I would be a scientist. My father was an organic chemist. My brother rebelled and became a molecular biologist. I spent a couple summers doing genetics research, and then, that's not right. And so then I worked at the San Diego Zoo for a summer and studied primate behavior. That wasn't right. And I realized that I loved science, but I didn't want to be a scientist. So then I thought, well, let me try science journalism. So I spent a summer working for Natural History Magazine, which sadly doesn't exist anymore. And that wasn't right. So I then, I knew I wanted to do something that made the world a better place, and I knew I wanted to get as far away from Cambridge as possible. I grew up here, and I went to Harvard, and I felt that I had benefited greatly in everything from my life to date, and I wanted to give something back. So I got a Rotary Fellowship and taught school in a rural school in Western Kenya, Ninaweza Kusema Kiswahili. And I spent a year there and decided I was really interested in, if I wanted to continue working in sort of development fields, I needed to take an economics class. So I ended up getting a master's degree at Princeton at the Woodrow Wilson School, so the peer school to the Kennedy School. And that's really how I started off. But it was very much trying things to figure out that I didn't want to do them, where I backed into figuring out what I did want to do.
Yeah, I also took a sadly more circuitous path. I always knew that I wanted to do something that was public service related. I started off thinking that I wanted to do human rights work, and particularly human rights in the Middle East. I spent my first summer at Harvard studying Arabic in Jordan. Summer after that, I worked for a human rights NGO in Egypt. And then I realized that I was interested in it, and it was a topic that I was passionate about, but it was maybe not the right career track for me. And so the summer after that, I went to work for a local government in London and saw that as a much closer fit to my interests. And so after that, I kept looking for government-related jobs in Western countries, and eventually landed in New York City government through a public service fellowship called the New York Urban Fellows Program, which I would highly recommend to anybody who's interested in urban planning, urban policy, and anything related to that. But Harvard offers a ton of advising and opportunities. They're all a little bit fragmented. So there's the Office of Career Services, Institute of Politics, Center for European Studies, and PBHA, you name it. The trick is finding out what you're interested in and then going to all of these places and figuring out all of the resources that there are to find what's right for you. And that takes a little bit of entrepreneurialism and being proactive and being a go-getter, because unlike with other recruiting opportunities, they're not going to come to you. You have to find something that's right for yourself.
All right, excellent. So I think our final quick question, and I think you've already touched on this, Giacomo, and this is primarily for Kyleigh and for Betsy. Are there any resources both at Harvard and outside of Harvard, so outside of Harvard would be great to hear from you too, that you would recommend to students who are looking into opportunities in public service?
When I was went back to the careers office at one point, there was still little index cards in the wooden drawers. So the fact that you've got LinkedIn and all these wonderful online resources today is terrific, as well as events like this. You know, I've, over my career, not just in the early stages, have always taken advantage of sort of trying to find paid internships or fellowships. They're great resources, and at places like Harvard, there are a lot of them because it's such a wealthy university. Another thing that you might try, I did this when I was probably in my mid to late 20s, was I joined the board of a nonprofit organization. I was living in New York City, but working internationally, and I wanted to have a community connection. So I joined the board of an organization called Global Kids, which is a youth development organization that works in New York City and now also Washington, D.C. And you can learn a great deal when you do board service. It sounds sort of dull, but there are a lot of organizations that are interested in getting more younger people on their boards, and I learned a great deal. I'm still very close to the founder of that organization, who no longer runs it, but is still very affiliated. So board service can be another terrific skill building, network building opportunity.
Yeah, outside of all the many resources at Harvard, it's a little bit of a joke amongst our team at Govern for America. Like, I'm obsessed with LinkedIn. I pay for the premium account. Like, before I started paying for the premium account, I actually would, like, in the first 5 days of the month, run out of the free searches because I just am constantly looking for people to connect with. And you would be shocked about the layer, how high up in an organization, if you LinkedIn message somebody, they will respond to you. We've had lots of success, cold LinkedIn messaging people, and I used that as I was starting to think about what I wanted to do, and as we're continuing to build Govern for America, use LinkedIn all the time. I just highly recommend networking, even it can have a really negative connotation, but it is the way that the world works. And so it's super important that you get comfortable with it, because it's not different in the public sector. So go LinkedIn. And also a plug, Govern for America Fellowship. We're closing our application deadline next Friday. That is another way of getting involved with public service if you're a senior. And look for it next year too.
Okay, wonderful advice, everyone. Thank you. I'd like to thank our panelists. We're going to now open it up for Q&A. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? We have about 10 minutes, I think.
This is a question for Betsy, which isn't so much about how you get into the field, so maybe it's inappropriate, but I'll ask it anyway. You're in rural America, and you're working mostly with young white people, or with white Americans, right? And I've been searching for who is actually organizing low-income white people to become part of the social justice movement. And I wonder if that's happening in Maine, or if there are organizations you recommend that are actually trying to create a united movement of people that is multiracial.
Yeah. So Maine is 94% white. We have a really important immigrant and refugee community. However, our population would be declining if it weren't for our immigrant and refugee community. And obviously we have Native Americans, people of color, but it is largely a white state. We are working primarily with small business people and entrepreneurs, so of all stripes, but not in sort of youth development. I know there's an initiative called Rural Rise, which is trying to do some organizing in rural regions around the country, but again, it's not so much rural youth. I would say, I mean, it is an interesting challenge that I think rural America faces, is that it's harder to get at scale and hard to connect people. I mean, in Maine, we have communities that are still using dial-up, so rural broadband is a real issue and a barrier. But yeah, I'm not sure that there's a real solution out there. Maybe you could start one organization that works with young people in rural America. Right. There are sector-specific ones, like there are folks, Young Farmers of America, and so, folks who are working in a sector-specific way with young people, and there are many youth organizations, but in terms of a pan-US rural, youth movement, I'd say it doesn't exist right now. There was someone over
Any other questions? Oh, yeah, the mic is coming. Yep.
Thank you. So I wanted to get back to the conversation you mentioned a little bit about compensation. And I feel sometimes that in public service jobs, particularly government, either state or local or federal, that there's a paywall you will hit. And that's certainly true in certain positions. But I'm interested in your advice on still ensuring you receive a fair compensation package and negotiating within that rigidity that often comes with government and public service work.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a first hit at that. I find we're working in lots of different states, so I know that what the packages are for the most part in those state capitals. They do tend to be, yes, they're low. Like there's no doubt about that, but they tend to be fairly on par with the living standard. So Augusta, Maine is going to have a much lower compensation package than Boston, but that's because it's cost less to live there. I think that depending on what the job is, if it's unionized, it's harder to negotiate, and in fact, there may be no room for negotiation, and that's something you just have to know going in. Is this a classified position or not? If it isn't, then there is certainly room for negotiation, and you should know how much can you push and how much can you not, and that comes along with that networking piece. Who can you talk to figure out what a reasonable amount to push for is.
I remember when I was moving from New York City to Maine, I plugged in how much would I have to earn in Maine to have the same standard of living as living in New York City, and it was half as much. So I think one of the things we need to get over is sort of reverse sticker shock, that it's very expensive to live in places like San Francisco and Boston. There are vast parts of America where it's much cheaper, and frankly, the quality of life is off the charts. I have an extraordinary community where I live, where if something happens to you, people show up to help. So there are, you can tell my blood pressure is going up a little bit, just because, I grew up in Cambridge, I lived in New York City. There are extraordinary parts of being in these urban, wonderful places. There are great aspects of livability that add value to your life, living in many other parts of the United States that are not as expensive to live in, and where you can build a wonderful life. My kids, for the vast majority of their K through 12 experience, were in very good public schools. So when I just encourage folks, as you're thinking about your life, the life you're trying to build for yourself, think holistically about it. I mean, I will absolutely say that, one of the big differences of moving from New York City to Maine was moving from a very diverse community to a much less diverse community. And that was something that obviously we had to decide we were willing to do. But it's not all about money.
Yeah, I agree about that. I think there's some tools that you can use to get more transparency and negotiating advantage when you're having a conversation about compensation. So I think almost every state or public agency has to put all public employee salaries publicly accessible online. So for example, for Massachusetts, it's called See-Through, CTHRU. and I can go and look up the name of a person who works in state government, and I'll see how much they make in a given year. And that helps you see, okay, if I'm going to be working with these 4 people or in this particular role, what is the going rate? How does my experience compare to those people's experience? And how can I try to say, well, you have this person who's working for you who's getting X amount, you should give me something comparable because we have the same experience. That's one thing. Another tool is Glassdoor or even LinkedIn that can allow you to see what the competitive rates are in the private sector, even public sector jobs. And again, that helps you get a point of comparison for what you should be trying to reach. And finally, I know that either because of full-time hiring freezes or for other reasons, a lot of public agencies are hiring people through contractor roles, and that has the downside of you don't get access to benefits such as healthcare, but you will have a higher take-home pay. So especially in my office, because we hire people who are developers or data scientists, we can't match what their going salary is in the private sector through full-time roles. And so we get them in as contractors, and we are able to pay them more that way. So if you have some flexibility in the way that you're willing to get hired, there are some trade-offs there, but there's also potentially a way to, if what you're concerned about is how much you're making, that you can take home a little bit more.
Okay, I think we have time for just one final question.
It was more a follow-up to what you guys were saying. So if somebody has a question who's a student, I would cede the comment. But I just wanted to follow up as someone who works in the public sector that a couple of thoughts to follow on what these people have said is, one, there's nothing that can match how you feel about your job. And I know that we're all here because we care about those things, but at the end of the day, you have to feel like what you're doing in your life work is really, really meaningful, and don't give that short shrift. Another thing I would say, also, I didn't think about this when I was younger, but this notion of the full package of what you get is really, really key. My salary may not be matched, but I never have had to worry about health care. I've never had to worry about what happens to my child. I'm going to have a retirement account. And, are you ready for this? I now have almost 8 weeks of vacation. And so time is money and all of that. So think about the full range of what you're getting. And I will say, so I have to say, the comment, you're right, there are many, many places in the world that you can live with a quality of life. So as someone who has now lived and raised a child in Cambridge, and even though the housing prices might look really high, I don't have a large house, but I have access to an enormous wealth of arts and what you have in a city and what you have in terms of public resources and the intellectual community. So think about the full package again of what your life is going to be not like. It's not just about the dollar sign. So then thanks to those on the panel for speaking up.
I think we have time for one quick student question if
Sure. Yep.
you want to.
Hi, so I think Betsy mentioned that joining a board position is a great opportunity to get involved with public service and get more familiarity with an organization. As a young person, it can be intimidating to try to join a board that is typically adult heavy. So I was wondering if you have any advice on how young students can approach this and how they might be able to articulate what value they would actually provide to an organization, given that they have less experience than someone who might be older.
Right. Well, I was fortunate in that organization, because it was a youth development organization, had a sort of a great respect for young people and both the energy and the different kinds of insights that they might bring to a board discussion, particularly for an organization that has to do with young people. So that was one. I guess the other is again, a lot of it coming down to connections, of finding someone who will vouch for you with the board chair, or the head of the nominating committee, or the executive director of that organization. There were a couple of times early in my career where, again, an organization was looking to add sort of bright younger people to their board, and somebody said, oh, you should talk to her, she knows XYZ, or she's done XYZ, or whatever. So using your networks. And I'd say a third is volunteer. I mean, if you start volunteering for an organization and they get to know you, again, if they're open to, I wouldn't do this maybe at the symphony unless you're, a philanthropist, you come from a wealthy family or a virtuoso violin player, but, if you are known to them and you've done interesting work and you're bringing interesting ideas and they're looking for a new generation of board leadership, you'll be right there. Those are just some thoughts.
Thank you guys so much. Can we all just applaud our wonderful panel?